delivered to your doorstep via drone. I'm sure a lot of you do. And a lot of this is already being trialed in EMEA. I fully expect not too far in the future, as consumers, you'll go online, you'll place an order, and that will be delivered to GPS coordinates in your yard. And that's not only going to apply to how consumers order, but even how business to business is transacted as well. That is not that far away. One thing I want you to think about, and I'm not going to go to this hyperlink, is even in our daily lives, how the role the drones are going to play. Dubai is moving in a big way toward this flying drone taxi service. So you'll go to your device, you'll summon a drone to your location, you'll put in there your destination. That unmanned drone will pick you up at your location and deliver you to your destination without really any human involvement. So that gives you some appreciation where we're going with drone technology. It is not that far in the future. Of course, you hear a lot about driverless vehicles, and they are already reality. There are still a lot of technical complications that need to be overcome. And if you even think about the amount of time that drivers spend on the road, on the open road, that really doesn't require a whole lot of driver engagement with the truck when they're going long distances, is the capability for driverless trucks. And I want you to ponder, what do you think it costs to retrofit a truck like this to be driverless? And a lot of people will respond, $1 million, several $100,000. It only costs today $60,000 to $80,000 to retrofit a truck like this to be driverless. So what you might consider is maybe an annual salary for a driver. You can replace that with automated technology to make that vehicle driverless. So it's not a huge investment. That is something you think about, if not in town, on the open road. How might driverless technology play a role with over-the-road transit? Have you considered how far away is it that you'll not stock things, or a parts warehouse, or for medical devices, not actually stocking those devices, but if you need a replacement part, going online and downloading the plan for whatever that part is and printing it right there at your location, versus holding a large stock or a large quantity of inventory. That reality is not that far away. How many believe when you're on a chat with a provider that you're actually talking to a live person? More and more you are talking to a chat bot, and how that integrates today has become a lot more invisible to us, that you're not talking to a real person. I'll share a personal experience. Not too long ago, I was searching for a part for my truck, and it was the latch for the passenger door on the right side, and it doesn't seem like something that would be that difficult to find. But I'd spent a long time online looking for it, and I couldn't find it. And I had spent about 20 minutes on the J.C. Whitney website, and a dialog box popped up, and it said, "You seem to be having trouble finding something. Can I help you?" And I was like, yeah, this will work. So I went on there, I described what I was looking for, and I said I couldn't find the part for the right side. I could only find it for the left side. So the chat said, "Just a moment, I'll see what I can find." And it was a few minutes, and it came back and said, "I'm searching for the part," and then finally came back and said, "I've not been able to locate that part. However, the part for the next model year is the identical part. Shall I order it for you?" So I was like, yes, and the next day that part showed up on my door, and that was a chat bot. That wasn't even a real person that I was talking to. So more and more, as you chat online, it's not even a real person, and these things are becoming that much more effective and very convincing. So how does that integrate into our future state customer service model? And how many of you fear that technology is going to take the place of workers? And I've been asked that question as we get into robotic process automation and digitization of our processes. Is a robot going to take my job? And that's something that we all have to be concerned about, is how do careers and expectations for how we'll do our work day in and day out, how is that already changing as a result of technology? So this is just to get you thinking a little bit. When I talk about digital, what are we talking about? Okay? So you really have two choices when it comes to digital. And your choices are this: adapt or die. And that's exactly what you're seeing in the marketplace today, is a real requirement that we adapt quickly to a changing market, changing job expectations, and what skills are required to do tomorrow's jobs. And that's where you'll hear a lot about analytics, process automation, automation capability, and replacing low value or repetitive tactical work with robotics. So I want to talk a little bit about Eastman's history and about adaptation, and you can think about how this applies to other companies. It's surprising to me even here the number of people that still believe that we're part of Eastman Kodak, even though Eastman Chemical Company was spun off from Eastman Kodak in 1994. So I want you to think a little bit about the Kodak story and adaptation. So how did Eastman even wind up in East Tennessee? So after World War I, George Eastman was seeking a source for chemicals for photographic processing. And the chemical in particular was methyl alcohol. And there was a plant here that could be used to make alcohol from wood. And that's how George Eastman landed in East Tennessee, with the abundance of wood available here and the capability to make methyl alcohol in this area. So that's Eastman's start here. And we have Eastman, really 100-year history, and we'll talk a little bit about that later with Eastman's centennial, which we're celebrating here in 1920. So how does that lead to kind of adaptation? So Kodak invented and dominated photographic film for 100 years. When I was a kid, the only film that you bought was Kodak film. So it was Eastman, Kodak really printed money for that period of time in photographic film production. And this is really the camera that got it all started, which put photography in the hands of the amateur photographer. And so what the amateur photographer was able to do was take pictures with this Brownie device, and you sent the entire device to Kodak for processing of the films, the pictures that were then sent back to the photographer. The thing that's interesting and a lot of people are not aware of is Kodak invented the first prototype digital camera way back in 1975. And this is what it looked like. And you wonder, how could you have invented digital photography and really have fallen out of the photographic industry not that many years later? By 2012, Kodak had filed for bankruptcy, even though they invented the first prototype digital camera. So what happened along the way? And it's a story of adaptation or failure to adapt. Kodak invented but invested in the wrong things. They sought to make early digital as good as film, making the first commercial digital camera very, very expensive. What Kodak did not foresee, and maybe was impossible to foresee at the time, that the market was in the ease of sharing, not necessarily in high quality printing. And the death blow for Kodak really came when cameras merged with phones, were not necessarily high quality photographs, but the ability to easily and quickly capture an image and then share it with somebody else versus printing that image out. Kodak continued to pursue a printed photo strategy, thinking that digital photography would never eclipse film in that regard. So Kodak invented the digital camera. They invested in the technology. They understood that photos would be shared online, but they failed to realize that online sharing was a new business, not the way to expand photographic printing. So the lesson from that is really, as a company, you think about any company is differentiating mission from purpose. Kodak's mission was film, but their purpose was really about sharing memories. So you really think about, for a company like Eastman Chemical Company today, our mission is to make chemicals, but our purpose is to enhance the quality of life in a material way. So that mission enables that purpose. And Kodak failed to recognize that their purpose was really about sharing memories, not about printing film. So also embracing the opportunities that disruption creates. Kodak thought a need to print would always exist and didn't foresee that we would share images, and there are very few photos that are really printed out, and they're really specific to very special occasions versus the way we share photography today. One thing Kodak also didn't do was really reach outside and enlist the help of others in the digital marketplace to really try to understand what are the strategies that might define how photography is used in the future. So you can think about, in summary, Kodak died. Now the company does still exist today, but really died in terms of their position as a provider of photographic printing and sharing of photography. So I want you to think about that in your own sense and in the sense of any company quickly adapting. If you do a search on Kodak today, people ask these questions: is Kodak even still in business? How did Kodak fail? Do they even still make cameras? What happened to Kodak from being a behemoth still in the middle 80s to where they are today? So just as digital transformed photography, I want you to think about the digital transformation on the supply chain and on the workplace in general. Research today suggests that supply chains are in the early stages of a digital transformation that will likely represent the greatest change in the integrated supply chain area. And we are seeing that already in terms of how we function, the expectation for speed and precision of results that are expected in supply chain execution. Automation will impact office work in the same way automation has impacted manufacturing for the past 40 to 50 years. And that's exactly what we're starting to see. And I think about it this way: just as few production workers want to put nuts on bolts all day, few highly skilled, college-educated professionals want to spend all day doing monotonous, low-value work, i.e., I'm going to talk about a little bit later, moving data from one screen to another, which we still do a lot of in the office environment. You didn't go to college to get a degree so that you could move data from one screen to another all day. You need to be involved in more high impact strategic activities versus very tactical activities. So this has really required this digital transformation, a rethinking of how work works. And I want to give you some really sobering statistics, especially as many of you will be entering the workplace. So automation has the potential to bring a profound impact on work in the enterprise in the coming years. About $14.6 trillion impact on annual wages, impact on about 1.1 billion jobs. The stat I want you to take away is 50% of activities that individuals in the workplace are paid for today can be automated by currently available technology. So you take that very close to home. Somebody sitting at a desk performing a task day in and day out, up to 50% of that work can be automated by technology that's currently available, and another 15% by technologies that are in the developmental stage. So you look at work today and say, not too far from now, 65% of that work can be automated. That is really sobering when you have concerns about, is automation and digitalization going to take the place of work? And really what's driving that, particularly in the supply chain, is the manufacturing environment, highly dynamic, ever-changing, and we have to be able to pivot and make decisions with a high degree of precision and with considering a lot of different factors to arrive at an informed decision. So supply chains and businesses today, very, very customer-centric. And that's driven by what I mentioned earlier. Consumer expectations continue to increase. And particularly in the business-to-business environment, we really lag what consumers expect as just blocking and tackling, just going out and placing a basic order and their expectations. So business-to-business still has a long way to go to catch up with that. More and more, it requires a greater visibility into the cadence of demand. How are things changing, not on a monthly or quarterly basis, but really on a daily basis? And you think about what manufacturing has really been faced with in the past quarter, is what is the impact of the COVID situation? How has that had an impact on inventory levels, what we need to produce, where that inventory needs to be, and how we will respond to what's going on in the marketplace in real time. Obviously, the world moves with a 24/7, 52-week-a-year mentality that we have to be able to respond and adjust to what's going on in the marketplace in real time, 24 hours a day. And with mobile tools, just expectations around digital and how the supply chain has to adapt in terms of digital capability. That kind of makes the case for change about digital. And one thing I want you to take away is business is a recurring process. And I put on here integrated business planning. That is a really good resume term as you go out into the marketplace and recognizing that business occurs in a cycle. And what you see here with the sales and operations planning process is what has generally been a monthly cycle for how business operates. With what has happened to us in the COVID environment, we are running this cycle pretty much on a weekly cadence. So we are doing a business plan every week and responding to what's going on in the marketplace really in real time. And our tools are really today insufficient to enable that weekly cadence. So we have really had to step up quickly in terms of how do we do data analysis and give feedback to the business really in daily and real time, responding to what's going on in the marketplace. So that's the main thing I want you to take away here, is recognizing that business is a recurring process. And I really didn't recognize that until I got involved in sales and operations and integrated business planning. So in terms of analytics, this is probably a graphic that you're familiar with. We do not lack for data at all in our business. What we lack is our ability to translate data into actionable insights and business cases. Again, I mentioned being faster and more responsive and being able to do this analysis in real time. If you consider today, 2020, there's maybe 1 billion or 1.5 billion devices connected to the internet at any one time. If you look out 20 years, that is going to increase perhaps 20-fold from 1 billion devices to 20 billion devices attached to the internet by an Internet of Things at any one time. And what you lack there is just a phenomenal increase in the amount of data that's available, but your ability to analyze and turn that data into actionable insights. And that is where an incredible gap exists, not only in terms of processing power, ERP processing power, but business analytics competency for those in the workplace. And that's really where there's a huge amount of demand. I think I saw where something like 90% of, say, the PhD data analysts are employed by Google and Amazon. So that'll give you some appreciation for the data analytics that's expected there. So this gives you some appreciation for the increase in data that we have in front of us, really starting today. And this really, a fairly new term that's been coined is fairly sobering as well, is this concept of dataism, the religion of business. And David Brooks in the New York Times, in a world of increasing complexity, relying on data could reduce cognitive biases and eliminate patterns of behavior that we haven't even yet noticed. This is a fascinating read, Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow by Harari. Argues that competing political or social structures are really data processing systems. And the value of any phenomenon or entity, meaning the value of a supply chain, is determined by its contribution to data processing. So more and more your ability to analyze, manipulate, and turn data in real time into actionable insights. I've done a little bit of research. Think about, especially this first statement, eliminating patterns of behavior we haven't yet noticed. Think of that in terms to the current COVID-19 response and what we could accomplish by understanding from the origin of that virus, understanding where that's going to spread most quickly and where the greatest vulnerabilities are for availability of respirators or the need for medical professionals to meet that need. So what could you do with artificial intelligence in a case like this for how your supply chain needs to respond for positioning respirators and medical devices so that you have them where you need them based on concrete artificial intelligence. So again, quite sobering, but a lot of promise out there in terms of what data can do. So let me pause there before I get into kind of where is Eastman in this whole journey. Any comment or question that anybody wants to make at this point?
I have a question, Bill.
Okay.
You talked about consumer demand. Could you comment on the shift in consumer demand around sustainability and the importance of having that sustainability component within the value chain, like Estee Lauder needs, et cetera?
Yeah, and that is a part of every discussion now with the consumer and the business is, how is this a sustainable solution? Because we have to think about things, especially in our industry, from a cradle to grave perspective. And if you've not done so yet, I encourage you to take a look on Eastman.com and what we're doing in circular economy around plastic recycling.
Yes.
Because how can we support consumer demand and consumer expectations and have enough left over for posterity so that we don't continue to take away from the environment so that it's not sustainable for the long term. And that's a part of every discussion, and it's a big part of Eastman discussion with consumers as well. How can a company like Eastman be part of the solution and not part of the problem?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have an additional question. Were you done, ma'am?
Yes, I'm done. Thanks.
Okay, just checking. So earlier you had mentioned technology creating an absence of jobs, which I completely agree with you on that. But the question I have is, do you also think the introduction of more technical processes like that will create jobs on the opposite side of that coin?
Yeah, and that's exactly where I want to go when we talk a little bit later, and I'll go ahead and introduce the term today as technology augmenting people, not necessarily replacing people. And I'll get to that when I talk a little bit about our future state customer service journey. Is our CSRs today spend more than half their time inwardly focused, just running down and solving problems internally. Tactical issues, order processing, order handling, the number of people you'll see when I get later that it just takes to get an order through our system. If my customer service reps did not have to spend that time internally focused, that is more quality time that they're spending with customers and the market, capturing strategic insights and serving customers rather than manually getting an order through the system. That's where we need to depend on technology. And even if you think about robotic process automation, which we are heavily into, for every 7 robotic processes that I put in place, it takes somebody to maintain, maintenance, repair, MRO, those robotic systems. So it's just different competencies that are required, and not so much, I used the term earlier, putting nuts on bolts all day.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I completely agree with you on that.
Yeah. So we'll dive into that a little bit further when I talk about our journey at Eastman. All right. So I'll move forward then. So one thing I want you to understand is, you think about a company like Eastman, you probably think, oh, very advanced, they've got a handle on this, they're able to respond quickly, probably have great technology, great computer systems. So we did an analytics maturity assessment about a year ago. And in this assessment, 5 is complete maturity. 1 is basic. Maybe you've got a computer and you know how to operate it. And you might approach 5 in any of these individual areas. And what you see here is our overall analytics maturity score, and this is about a year old, was less than 2. And you can see in the individual areas where we do have, if you call it a strength, at 2.2. But this is just really to say, even at a company like Eastman, we have a lot of work to do in terms of analytics, data analysis, and, digital maturity. So our lowest score was in use cases. And what use cases really means is understanding what's the problem that you're trying to solve from the user or the consumer perspective. Do we really understand what's needed? And in a lot of cases, and it's partly because of our heritage as a company, is a lot of times we don't know what's needed downstream. And I say because of our heritage as a company, much of that was as a supplier of intermediates. So we weren't downstream in a lot of markets really understanding what those markets needed. We supplied it an intermediate to an end producer, and we really didn't have much of a connect to that end market at all. So it's still a weakness for us, and use cases has become more a part of our terminology than it ever has before. Go ahead, Hunter.
So you mentioned that like it's a part of your heritage. I'm curious as to how do you change your heritage and to try to adapt to becoming more adept to access that information.
Yep, it has to be deliberate. Uh, and you have to earn the right to do that. So as you go downstream to a user or a company and you start asking questions about their problems and how you might solve those problems, you really have to show that you have capability to meet that need. So you don't only hear that and you throw a solution over the wall, you have to be willing to work collaboratively to solve that problem versus going out and gathering input and saying, okay, here's a solution, try this and see if it works. And I still see this a lot, even in our own center of excellence or in IT. You perceive there's a problem out there, you think you've got a great solution, you throw a solution over the wall, and it just doesn't stick because it doesn't ultimately meet the need. So you have to be resourced, you have to be willing to go downstream and ask questions, and you have to be willing to be reflective and say, I don't necessarily have all the answers, but how can we collaborate to solve the problem?
It's a lot like how you mentioned trying to get business to business, going to business to consumer. It sounds a lot like that's migrating towards that. Is that what you're trying to say there?
Yeah, exactly right. So, and I will tell you without getting too bogged down, uh, sometimes it is hard to go downstream and get those insights because a lot of time that company in the middle doesn't want you to have those insights. That company only wants you to know what they tell you. So we really have to be willing to go downstream to those markets on our own and discover those insights and learn together with those downstream markets. So it's really a change in thinking and our approach to going downstream. So our highest score was in organization, and that's to say at least we had an analytics organization in place. And we continue to make great strides there, but this is probably a 5-year journey to get us to a level 4 maturity in terms of analytics. So, but at least we've stopped, we've looked and said, where are we on this journey and where do we need to spend our time building out our analytics maturity? So our choices, not only as a company, but as a supply chain organization, just like I said earlier, are adapt or die. And we really have been on a journey in our supply chain since 2012 to do that. First of all, to start build capability and competency that is strategic in our supply chain, and that is by design versus people who found their way to supply chain really without any desire, passion, or understanding, but really to make supply chain a more strategic function than it had been historically. So I want to talk a little bit about our digital journey because it talks not only about the future of supply chain for Eastman, but I think the future of supply chain in general. So 3 significant projects that we're working on is our customer service vision, which we call insight-driven customer service, which speaks to being able to go and willing to go down line to capture those insights. Real-time shipment visibility, which is a program that we have underway. And then I want to talk a little bit about work automation. And those are just 3 of the big programs that we're working on now. So I want to talk a little bit about our customer service vision first. Let me tell you what success looks like with any automation program. And nowhere will you see here about digitization and automation ultimately replacing people. It's again, as I said earlier, augmenting people so that they can work more efficiently. They can optimize their performance. You can do things with a lower level of error. You think about repetitive transactions and the amount of error that having a human involved in that transaction introduces. So you've got the ability to take some of that error component out. You enhance the employee experience. I mentioned, a college graduate not wanting to come in and put nuts on bolts all day. You want an experience where you can contribute at a higher level, and ultimately it is about increasing company performance. So everything that we're doing in our own digital and automation platform is really around driving success around these strategic elements. So one thing I want to show you here, without you being worried at all about getting into the words, is our current customer service. You might say, this is what it takes to get an order through our system. And the thing I want you to notice on this journey map is the number of people that are involved just in getting an order through Eastman systems. We still do a lot of things by brute force and a lot of things that require human intervention. And I mentioned earlier, 50 to 70% of my customer service reps' time is spent solving problems internally and running down problems so we can get that order out the door. The thing I want you to notice here is in the gray boxes where you see the computer is where some of that manual intervention is replaced by computer systems, whether it's automation or Salesforce.com capability or communication platforms. How can you streamline some of that using technology, going back to what I said earlier, to augment the customer service role so that they can spend more time on strategic endeavors and not spend time putting nuts on bolts to get an order through the system. So this is probably a 5-year journey. It involves Salesforce.com implementation, not only for order management, but for customer feedback. It involves robotic process automation for some of those repeatable transactional processes. Can those be automated and replaced with technology and take the person out of the loop? As well as other artificial intelligence to look at, say, customer order patterns. Well, you would expect a customer to order by now or to order this volume of material. The system can predict for us, hey, this customer hasn't ordered. It might be time to reach out and find out a little bit. Does that customer intend to place an order? Is there something else going on that we can help with? So again, if you look 3, 4, 5 years down the road, a lot of this human tactical involvement being replaced with digital capability or augmented by digital capability. Another thing is, we're running a pilot here now, is real-time shipment visibility for what we call an Amazon-like experience. With Eastman and in business to business today, for the most part, when a truck leaves my door or a ship leaves the dock, I have very little visibility where that shipment is until it arrives at the customer. And in most cases today, I don't know that shipment is late until the customer calls me to ask me, where is my shipment? So we have no real-time access to shipment visibility. With software that we are piloting today with a partner, what you see here is an international shipments, bulk shipments going by a bulk vessel. This shows me in real time where those shipments are. And you'll see these as green, it's on time, red, it's delayed by some amount, and orange, maybe it's not as delayed as if it were red. And one of the biggest issues we have in international shipping is transshipment points, that this might pass through a distribution center or a transshipping point where it comes off a ship, it goes in a warehouse before it goes on another vessel or a truck. A lot of times shipments can get stuck in those transshipment locations and we don't have any clue that they're stuck. And this will show me via a red symbol that you've got a shipment that's stuck somewhere, you need to look into it. Again, for that Amazon-like experience. So this shows me at border crossings, how long is it taking ships at ports and in international locations, and are they held up? And these that are red are held up by more than 25% of what would be expected. So what you're seeing in the current COVID situation is everywhere things are held up at port for one reason or another. So I can drill down into these chevrons and get to specific shipments and understand what shipments exactly are held up and how long have they been held up there. And finally, if you think about just domestic shipment for border crossings, our shipments held up at the border. So I can go to the Boston area where things are crossing into Canada at the Canadian border. So I have 33 shipments that are held up there. I can drill down to those individual shipments, and you'll see on average, because this is orange, those shipments are held up. Well, I can get down to the individual shipment level and find out what's held up there and why. This is a huge step from where we are today, where we have virtually no visibility of bulk truckload shipments. So really seeking that Amazon-like experience. And ultimately what you want to get to is you want a web interface so customers can go online on their own and track these shipments without having to contact a customer service rep to find out the status of their shipment. So huge step, again, from where we are today. So that talks a bit about the customer service journey and about shipment visibility. I want to talk a little bit about robotic process automation and what we've done in the past year alone. So really focused on transactional, repeatable activities that can be replaced by robotic process automation. So what I want you to see here is today we have 12 unattended bots in production. What does unattended mean? That means it runs in the background on your ERP system and nobody has to kick that automation off. So it runs on a schedule. Nobody has to touch it. It runs in the background. And we have a new group within Eastman called Automation Central. It's their responsibility to monitor these unattended automations. And we work closely with them in development, and you can see a description of what those unattended automations are. We have 26 in production today that are considered attended automations. What does that mean? It runs on somebody's laptop or their PC to run a transaction or a series of transactions that user actually kicks off. So somebody is able to take a series of steps out of their day and have a robot run those transactions to generate reports, for example. One of the best examples I can think of is somebody might run a series of SAP transactions to generate a report output. That's something that can be easily automated, that the bot will go in and run that series of transactions and generate a report. So today we have, between 35 and 40 automated transactions or automated solutions in place. And I look at dashboards every day that show me the thousands of transactions that are now being done by bots that don't have to be conducted by people. So I want to give you a specific example. And this one is order translation that I have been a real champion advocate and have really pushed within Eastman since I became involved in the digital project. Believe it or not, so Eastman, we tender between 400 and 450,000 shipments per year. So if you think of that in terms of orders, so 400,000 orders, 70% of those orders come in as a PDF attached to an email that looks like this. So that customer service rep gets that order attached as a PDF in an email. They pull that PDF up on one screen and they enter the relevant data into an SAP order on the other screen. That's insane in a digital world that a bot does not translate that order from a PDF into SAP. So we are using technology called IQBot. You might have heard of optical character recognition, OCR, to read this PDF and translate it into an SAP order, taking at some point, 70% of 400,000 orders out of somebody manually copying that data from one screen into SAP. And I go back to putting nuts on bolts. You didn't go get a college degree, and our customer service reps today require a bachelor's degree. You didn't get a bachelor's degree so that you could copy information from one screen into SAP to generate an order. So one that I'm particularly excited about, taking that manual work out of our system. And I go back not only to the manual transactions, but it's error prone as well because of the opportunity to introduce error just by copying data from one screen to another. So that's a very real world example in the digital space. The other thing we're trying to do is drive development not from top down, but bottoms up, where the actual user is bringing the ideas to us and the problems to solve, the things to automate with our Digital Pathfinders program. So that we're not giving people a fish, so to speak, we're teaching people to fish so that they can do that desktop automation and do that development on their own to solve that problem, because ultimately the people that are doing the work understand where the manual work is. And I do see at least one ETSU alum in the picture at the top with Allie Gibson as one of our Digital Pathfinders, and with Allie being an integral part and a contributor to our digital programs. So thanks, Allie. If you're there, anything you want to add?
I'm here. No, nothing else, I don't guess. I will say this was something that I wasn't exposed to before working, so definitely wouldn't be overwhelmed by all of the digital talk, but it definitely does empower you to want to automate stuff more when you're the one that has the stuff sitting on your desk that is holding you up from doing bigger things, right? So kind of as Bill said, you want to be able to stretch yourself and be able to make big differences on your desk every day and just at work. And so being able to automate some of the mundane tasks is really exciting, and it's helps to provide, I guess, more opportunity to do more impactful things every day.
Thanks for that, Allie. So we're coming up on 5 o'clock, so I'm going to speed through a couple things here. Briefly, I want to talk about what makes for a successful career. I talked about fit in supply chain, and I like to describe it like this. If you're somebody who likes to work from a to-do list, supply chain might not be the best place for you, because it is so responsive, so agile in terms of responding to and meeting customer needs. And there's a hyperlink in here called A Day in the Life that I invite you to go visit. I'll send this presentation to Matt, and then you'll have a chance to go out and click on some of the hyperlinks that are included here. So Matt, before I wanted to talk a little bit about COVID-19 response. Let me pause here, and I'll take some direction from you, Matt, on where we want to go.
Sure. I think for right now, I think maybe reach out to the students on the call and see if anybody has any questions at this point before we move on to COVID-19.
Yeah, questions or comment, much appreciated. All right.
I was curious.
Go ahead.
Going almost all the way back to the beginning, when you were talking about the automated trucks, with them already having vehicles that have issues with avoidance, collision avoidance, as well as just the driving in general. So obviously with a pickup, or not with a pickup, with an 18-wheeler, you're driving as well as having to dock to unload. Do you see there being that? I understood that it was 60 to 80 grand to retrofit the new truck. With liability coming into effect there, is the cost analysis, is there that big of a gap into what it would cost to keep your person in comparison to what liability could come up with automated vehicles?
Yep. So I will share my opinion, and you'll find opinions all over the place.
Absolutely.
I don't see, if ever we get to the point in urban traffic, inner city driving, that you'd be to the point of having an automated truck going door to door from pickup to delivery.
Mm-hmm.
I do see a couple things. If you think of amount of time a truck spends on the open road. So from terminal or drop point to drop point, for example, could that truck transit on the open road without having a driver in the seat? And even if that's too far a stretch, could you think about a convoy of trucks on the open road with a lead driver and that convoy of trucks following that lead driver without necessarily a driver in every seat? So I think there are a couple different ways to think about it, but I agree, even when it comes to passenger vehicles, I think we are a long, long way, if ever we get to urban driving that is completely driverless. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Okay. What else?
I was going to ask a question involving, you mentioned earlier your belief about drones delivering and picking up packages and sending them to customers' doors. I was just thinking, and I know I've read about this previously, but the security, if there's like any breach in security, I don't know, how would, like, I guess a company like Eastman, I'm not sure if they wouldn't be doing smaller packages, but how would a security breach, like how would that be avoided with those things like that going on?
Yeah, and that's a concern, always a concern with any technology. And it's not only security, it's liability as well. This drone crashes into something, delivers something to the wrong place. You even think about liability with driverless vehicles. And I'd say all those questions haven't been answered yet. And that's part of the delay with drones in North America. It's still around regulations. Regulations for drone pilots, regulations around liability, and exactly the type of questions that you ask around security. And that's why I think if you look in the US, we're a little bit behind Europe. There's a lot of piloting that's going on. I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, but in some major metropolitan areas, you could go to Subway, for example, and order a sandwich. And they put the sandwich in this like cooler that's an automated delivery vehicle. And this cooler transits the streets and delivers to the destination. And the person comes out to the cooler, enters the code, takes their sandwich out, and the cooler goes back to the supplier. And I have the same questions that you do. Well, then somebody going to pick that up, take it, run over it with a truck? It just seems like there's just so many opportunities for that to fail. But it's things that are being looked at.
Thank you.
And then kind of to put that into perspective too, as to some of the smaller, Bill, you mentioned some of our, bots that we have that are currently functioning at Eastman. So putting that into a smaller perspective, those are other questions, that we've had to ask as we've created those bots as well, right? So this bot might make it easier for us to complete our everyday tasks, but are we going to still meet SOX compliance if we put this into place? Is there still a separation that's required by regulations that we have on businesses. So you're looking at all of those and where are fail points, right? So how do we know if our bot doesn't do what it's supposed to do? So that's not just on a drone and an 18-wheeler perspective. That's anything that you use to, if you remove human intervention and try to trust technology, there's always a risk. And so trying to build that in when you're making those decisions is something that I've found difficult to think through a lot of times.
Yeah. The one that keeps me up at night is an unattended automation kicking off at 11 o'clock at night when nobody's around and running thousands of transactions that weren't intended and creating a lot of damage that somebody has to come back the next day and fix. Those are the types of things that keep me up.
Okay, any other questions from students? Okay, I'd like to open it up to everyone else. Any other questions? Hey, Bill, so I have a question for you.
Sure.
So one of the things that's interesting that you talked about, and here I'll turn on my camera to be fair, since I can see you now, you can see me.
There you go. That's only fair, right?
Yeah, it's only fair, right? So you mentioned the frequency of the business cycles or the planning cycles has increased, where you're going from monthly cycles to weekly cycles. And I can just imagine the amount of integration that has to occur and communication and collaboration has to occur across the organization to make that happen and to do it right. And I do research in the realm of supply chain resource orchestration and capability building, and it kind of rang a bell that really what you're doing is you're creating capabilities. And at some point, we're going to return to some level of normalcy. And the question is, these capabilities that you create now, do you think they're going to give you a competitive advantage over others who haven't been able to do that as well when we return to normal times? I mean, obviously it's helping you now, but I could see this as being a huge win, even as things return to normal.
Yeah, and it obviously does, because you think about your ability to respond depends on the velocity and visibility of data. And that's really what this has forced us to do, is how do we make things move faster and how do we improve visibility into all the data that we have available to us. And like you might expect, is once we do this, it becomes the new expectation. It becomes the new qualifier, you might say, for how business is run. So what I have seen is just a lot of good work that's gone into dashboards and cockpits and data visibility that allows us, and you mentioned it, we are so heavily integrated, and Allie, who spoke, she lives it day in and day out. We have to run that business process all the way back to our major assets. So we have to do a business plan downstream that really has to cascade back upstream to our integrated assets. So you have to be able to do those things in sequence, and you have to be able to do them very quickly. And it's tough. I have lived it. It is hard enough to sequence it in a given month. To have to sequence everything in a week is overwhelming. And you're right. There is some competitive advantage that will result from that.
Excellent. Okay, well, if there are no more questions, I think we're ready to move on to the COVID-19 response and all the great things that Eastman is doing.
Yeah, and I'll move through this fairly quickly. Probably nothing that's a surprise here to anybody. So we've been working from home since mid-March, and we've learned social distancing isn't necessarily about distancing socially. It's about distancing physically, and we've learned a lot about how to use our online tools. I've always complained that we don't use these tools well enough. Well, we have learned a lot, and video has become an expectation as we do these online meetings, so people are getting a lot more comfortable with it. We have obviously not traveled. Domestic is expected to remain very limited through the second half of 2020, and I will be surprised if there is more than a handful of international travel for most of the year. The biggest thing from a business impact is a focus on running for cash versus running for earnings. And so it really requires supply chain professionals to understand what that means in terms of your asset utilization and impact on inventory. Because what we're seeking to do, when you're a supply chain professional, you, especially in the planning space, you have to think of inventory not as kgs in a warehouse. You have to think of inventory as dollars in the bank. And how is that dollar better deployed versus being tied up in a warehouse, not only as cost of capital, but as warehouse expense as well. So huge focus on, especially in a lower demand environment, and the need to generate capital or cash to run the business, a real focus on drawing down inventory and freeing up that cash. I call it triage, because what we're really doing is focusing on those things that are critical to survival. And right now, cash is defined as king and critical to our long-term success. So the other factors that influence that beyond inventory is how much are we spending on capital expense? What might we have planned an investment or a capital expansion that we have pulled back on so that we don't have to deploy that cash? And then other major controllable spend around travel, training, contract employees, what have you. And I tee that up for those of you who are studying business or studying supply chain, is when you say run for cash, what does that mean? And that is something that supply chains have had to become very well versed in, really within the past several years, but certainly today, when generally you're running for earnings, today you're running for cash. And then beyond that is just controlling enterprise cost with network optimization. How can we eliminate nodes of inventory in the network? How can we be more efficient in what we have tied up in the network or in shipping costs? How can we closely control purchase orders so that we're not buying things and adding those to inventory unnecessarily, all focused on controlling cost? For Eastman and our competitors and a lot of other companies, I'm sure a focus on triage and doing what's absolutely necessary for survival of the patient. So I don't think, like I say, anything here that's out of the ordinary. Any comments that people would make around just kind of COVID-19 response? All right. So with that, Matt, I am going to wrap it up. Couple concluding slides in here. The thing I mainly want to say is, Eastman's been around for 100 years. You may not be aware. Eastman celebrates its centennial this year. Certainly not the way that we planned to celebrate it. A lot of things going on to transform Eastman, transform operations. And the thing I wanted to call out here, operations transformation: plan, source, make, deliver, and service. To our supply chain students, that should sound very familiar and give you some appreciation for how supply chain fits into that transformation and fits into enabling company success. So while we celebrate our centennial, we look forward to continuing to drive company success so that Eastman will be here 100 years from now as well. So with that, I invite questions here. I also invite you to email me, and I'm glad to answer any questions that you have that come out of this.
I was curious at what Eastman's response has been during the COVID-19 with upcoming internship possibilities, and if they are not available, what would you advise an upcoming graduate to focus on or pursue during a pandemic like this?
So it varies a bit by organization. For example, engineering internships that required engineers to be in the plant, those were completely withdrawn. And it might create an opportunity for those that aren't in their senior year or between their junior and their senior year to have a co-op or an internship later. So those obviously had to be withdrawn. In global supply chain, I had to pretty steeply curtail internships, but I did not withdraw them. What I'm hoping to do is if I could deploy those internships in the fall or the spring, I'll be willing to do so. My biggest concern was managing 6 interns potentially remotely, and our ability to do that so that it is a meaningful experience for the intern and also for Eastman. That's why we didn't withdraw those offers, but we went back to those interns with how could we do this in the fall or in the spring when we have a little more certainty about our ability to bring people on site to run projects. For ETSU interns, one thing that is a critical advantage that you have is being local, because you do have more opportunity for a part-time internship potentially in the fall. So we'll be on campus recruiting hopefully as normal in the fall. That's where we need to be connected, and you need to build your network around intern opportunities at Eastman, because you will have an opportunity as we get more certainty about the employment outlook.
Good.
Okay. Did that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
Do you see that being across the board as far as most companies at this time are going to be on a similar pathway?
Yeah. Here's what I heard from partner universities is most companies withdrew internships outright.
Yeah.
Without offering any flexibility or, hey, can we wait? Can we do something later? They were just for the most part withdrawn while people hunker down and try to figure out what the situation is going to be long term.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Any final
This may be something
questions? Go ahead.
This may be something that me and Professor Jenkins talk with you more directly about. But you mentioned recruiting in the fall. If there's anything that we can do to help you with recruiting in the fall in terms of setting things up, please feel free to reach out to the Supply Chain Association, to either me or Professor Jenkins. We'll try to help you guys out as much as we can to try to get some people lined up for you guys to help you guys out in the fall as much as we
Love
can.
to hear that. And Allie, who spoke earlier, she leads our ETSU recruiting team. I think Logan might be on as well, who's part of that ETSU recruiting team. And we look forward to working together on campus. We've had great success so far and just look forward to continuing to build our presence there. All right, Matt, I've got to scrub this a bit just to be sure there's nothing here that I can't distribute. So I'll do that and I'll send you a scrubbed version that you'll be able to share with the organization.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Enjoyed it.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your time.
Thank
Okay,
you.
bye all.
You.